Good morning, Alan, and everybody else. This is Sunday morning. It's nice, so I'm sitting outside so I get some light. And we're talking about return to healing, which a patient recently told me his patient's son's in medical school. And she finished the book and she said, "Why isn't this required reading?" And she said, "My son doesn't even want to read it because he doesn't want anything to get in the way of what he's been taught." And she said, "You'll read it or I'm going to stop paying for medical school." And it should be required reading because
Absolutely.
honestly, people don't understand the way our system works. And there's an example of it. So we're always interested in what other people are saying. And since we talked about cholesterol guidelines not too long ago, and I've also said that because I did talk about cholesterol guidelines and asked questions, among other things, the local cardiology group in my town reported me to the Board of Medicine, which, for those of you who don't know, means they want to take away my license or at least have the Board of Medicine say I'm not allowed to talk about these things anymore. And I'm still waiting for a verdict on that, and may have to get a lawyer. But this is just because I put in articles that they didn't like. So there's a lot of chatter on the internet, mostly from doctors, talking about this, and most of them are looking at um, selected studies that when I checked into some of the studies they were looking at are observational studies. And what they do is they create these things called meta-analyses where they put a bunch of junk studies together and say, well, we have so many studies, how could it be wrong? But every study is a junk study from the pharmaceutical company. So one study I found interesting, Alan, that they used, and I will say there were three podcasts I looked at where they were very critical of measuring and treating cholesterol, and all of them were blocked on my web browser. And also, when I went into AI, two different types of AI, and just asked them about studies that debunk the cholesterol myth, all three AI sources said, well, no, this is a proven fact, the cholesterol thing. And any study that doesn't support it is flawed.
Yeah.
This is AI. Just so you know, AI is programmed by people who what they do is they use bots to just put the drug company studies in a billion times. So it
Yes.
looks like they are so important that they dismiss all the other studies. So Mark Hyman, when it was a functional medicine doctor, his was blocked, but I found another way around it. And I mean, he's very adamant. If anyone knows who Mark Hyman, and he's written a lot of bestsellers, he worked at the Cleveland Clinic. He um, he believes in diet, exercise, stress reduction, and he made it clear. LDL, look, we've never proven that cholesterol is that important. So just two quick things, and then I'll shut up. One is that there was a study by the British Medical Journal called the BMJ now that was a huge compilation of cohort studies. Cohort studies are studies that are followed over time. And they used only randomized cohort studies, and all the studies but one, or maybe two, there were like 20 studies, 22 studies. So I think 20 out of 22 showed that over age 60, the higher your LDL cholesterol is, the longer you live. And the people in these podcasts just dismiss them. They say, well, when people get sick, their LDL goes down, so that will compound it. But not once did they show that these studies show that. In other words, when you have that many studies showing that there's this correlation between high LDL and longevity, you can't just dismiss it that quickly. You should want to do another study or say, we found that in these studies there was a
Yeah.
problem, which there wasn't, by the way. They address this issue and say it was not an important issue. And whether or not you're going to believe the BMJ or everyone who attacks them, the fact is that's something we need to question. Whether LDL might be important as you get older, our body makes cholesterol for a reason. And when we make cholesterol, we feed our brain. And it's really important to that and other things. So, secondly, Alan, you and I wrote an article in the American Family Physician, peer-reviewed article that actually was one of the few articles we wrote that got no pushback from not only the editors, but also from anyone who read it. Because we write articles and people write in and say bad things about us, but that we're used to it. No one did.
We like it.
We like it. We actually do like it. It means people are reading it, which makes us happy. Our article looked at every study that included people who were older in statin studies. And there were only two. that included people over 80, and both of them showed no benefit of lowering LDL cholesterol. We know lots of drugs that lower LDL cholesterol are frankly dangerous. Niacin lowers it and increases death rate. So one of the things these podcasters pointed to was a study in Japan of a medicine called, I can't pronounce the generic name. Help me, Alan. It's called Zetia. What's
Estimibe.
yeah, I can't pronounce. That's beyond my comprehension. So thank God they came up with Zetia. Zetia has been shown not to do anything.
It's a useless drug.
It's useless. It
Totally.
lowers LDL cholesterol and does not reduce mortality. So that a lot of these podcasters pointed to the study and says, and it does say, final proof lowering cholesterol in elderly reduces
Yes.
major events substantially. So, of course, because I am who I am, I read through the study, and that's what they write. It's just in Japanese men who are 75 to 80. There were just a few hundred people. It was randomized. It was published by the maker of Zetia. I mean, that's who paid for it. And it was done through these corporations, these institutions in Japan. So just Japanese men, and it showed that all the things they wrote, major reduction in cardiovascular risk. This will answer the question. This will resolve the issue. So I looked at it. You look at the tables. You don't care what these people write. By the way, all these podcasters did not look at the tables. They just looked at what they wrote in the article. And this is what the drug company wants them to write, so they write it. That's another topic, Alan. But
Yeah.
the
So,
tables, the
so
facts don't always equal what's actually written in the article.
absolutely. So,
So it did, there was a tiny reduction in non-fatal heart attacks. Now we've wrote an article on that too. That non-fatal heart attacks are often just high troponin levels, which are done in the hospital when you go in for a toe fungus. They'll do it on any older person. Um, there was no reduction in fatal heart attacks, i.e., death. There was no reduction in stroke, but there was a reduction in revascularization. In other words, it was like a 0.25% fewer people got bypass surgery or stents. Now we know too that's bypass surgery and stents don't save any lives. So people do them for reasons that are not important. They do them because they found a blockage in a healthy person and they decide to fix it. That blockage was probably already bypassed by the body or would never affect him anyway. What was interesting is in the group that took, and this was not mentioned in the study at all, the group that took Zetia had a 1% higher overall mortality than the group who didn't take Zetia. Something they didn't mention. When I went on AI and asked about it, they said, well, it wasn't statistically significant. And yet it was 1%. There was nothing else in there even close to a 0.25%. Obviously, it's something that should have raised alarm saying, why are more people dying on this drug? And shouldn't we do another longer, bigger study before we allow people to take a drug that kills potentially 1% of people who take it? Again, this study pointed more to the fact that maybe older people need LDL. And it's just the
absolutely.
fact that these doctors who are banging their fists on the table saying, we're killing millions of people a day, they don't care to look at data. They just want to scare people, and that's their goal.
Well, let me give a couple of comments. Andy's clearly
Please, so I can
passionate
shut
about
up.
this. He didn't bang his fist. He just waved them a little bit. So it's kind of similar. So a couple of comments to a bunch of things Andy said. So whenever you hear final proof, you know, okay, this article is wrong. You could just stop there because we know in medicine nothing is final. So that's one. AI folks, I play with AI a lot also when I'm researching things. You got to be very careful because again, it's all skewed. Humans are not really reviewing the results of this to see if they're accurate or not. And the AI studies clearly show that at least 30% of what they're saying in AI is wrong when it's related to medical advice and medical care. So you got to keep away from that as well because it's rampant out there and people are believing things. The other thing is, every study is designed to get you the result that these people want. And there's no studies out there that look to promote non-pharmacal management of anything. And the reason there's no studies for that is there's no money in it. And since the studies are all funded by the pharmaceutical companies and the government's funded by the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA and CDC and all these things, and research is funded by it, we know every study that's done is about an intervention that will make someone a lot of money or a drug that's going to make a company a lot of money. And we're not going to study things that show, like, an anti-inflammatory diet is a wonderful thing. And that, all you need to do is eat healthy and exercise and you'll live a long life. And, it's the same with any preventive test, any cardiac test. We could talk about every test out there that's quote proven, whether it's cardiac calcium scores. Me and Andy were just asked to write an article on breast calcium scores, which will come out soon. So there's just so much propaganda out there. And when you look at a podcast and it has an advertisement in it from a drug company, it shows it even more that these people have bought in, they've drank the Kool-Aid, and they actually believe the propaganda they're selling and think there's no way but my way because I'm right, as opposed to common sense medicine with common sense screening and common sense prevention. And we've just gone away from that. We've just, we don't study, for example, population health studies that, if you put everyone on a good diet and an exercise program and mindfulness for stress reduction, like those are the three big ones that have been shown to affect life. And, people to wear bicycle helmets and things like that, that's what's going to make you live longer, not making your LDL down to 20 or 30, which is what these guys are doing now. It's absolutely insane. I could tell you every patient that I see now that comes from an outside cardiologist, when I see them on the follow-up since the new studies have come out, the new cholesterol guidelines, everyone has been added Zetia. Every single, it's just amazing. So I talked to the cardiologist I work with, and I said, "Thank God I haven't seen you do it yet." He goes, "Well, I've been thinking about it." I was like, "Well,
Oh, geez,
I was like, drop it." I was
drop it.
like, and the other thing, and if folks don't understand, my final comment before I give it back to Andy is that, you know, people don't realize when they read the studies and the studies show an X number of reduction in plaque or cardiovascular events, but then you see the overall mortality is increased. Folks, what that's telling you is if you take this drug, you're more likely to die from anything. So why would you take something that you're more likely to die?
And
It's utterly insane.
and I guess the corollary to that is if these doctors on TV, and there was one where these two doctors wearing scrubs were sitting in the middle, they invited a guest doctor who was a cardiologist who was also wearing scrubs. Now, just so you know,
That means he came out of the cath lab.
it means I think he'd put on scrubs so he looks like he's a cardiologist. I think he probably walked to their house, was wearing regular clothes, and decided to put on scrubs so people would believe him more because he's that arrogant. We could wear scrubs, Alan, and these things, but I wear a t-shirt. I'm less arrogant. But the point is that this guy's he was banging his fists, and he was so arrogant. Like he had this smile on his face, like I am so right. And now everyone's going to believe me because I'm a cardiologist. But yeah, I'm seeing patients whose LDLs are in the gutter. They're feeling like crap, honestly, from these drugs. I had a guy, I may have mentioned it. I had a patient recently who made an appointment just to talk to me because he was going to the cardiologist the next day. His LDL, Alan, was 80. And he said, the guy said, if it's not below 70, I'm going on new drugs on top of the drugs I'm on. And he said, what am I going to do? And I said, yeah, yeah, because if it was 71, he would have put him on a new
Yep.
drug because the guidelines say go below 70.
Right.
Even though the drugs he
Very
was going to
practical
add on,
medicine. Very practical.
they were gonna add drugs that clearly have been shown either to increase death rate or to not affect death rate at all. And when non-fatal heart attacks don't go down, you're basically saying the heart attacks you're lowering are nothing, are piddly ones. Even there were very few of those that were reduced. So what they do also, a little trick is called the composite value. So they'll take every little thing that improved a little, less revascularization, i.e., fewer stents, slightly lower non-fatal heart attacks.
You mean it's fewer useless stents?
Yes, useless stents. So when they put them all together, instead of 0.2% and 0.2% and 0.2% reduction, now it's a 0.6% reduction. And they say this is dramatic. If we did this with all 100 million people who are over a certain age, think about how many lives we and they blow it up like that. The good news is the reason these things are coming out, Alan, is because Americans are starting to say, what the hell? This doesn't make sense. And when you say there are no studies of of eating and all that, which there aren't, we do have population not studies, but what I call open eyes, where we can see the places in the world where they do eat well and they do exercise, which could be walking a
And
lot.
they don't take statins or estimebe.
They don't see doctors. They don't get their LDL checked. They're living 10 years longer than we're living without dementia, without heart disease. And how these people on these podcasts or even these cardiologists don't see that. I always say I have this thing called the apocalypse test. I tell my patients, if the apocalypse came and we couldn't make any pills anymore, how would you do? And the people who are on these high dose statins, they said, good news, you do better if you aren't on these
Yeah.
medicines. There's a lot of drugs, by the way.
So a couple of things in response to that too. So, like Andy said about where people live, so they have done many population health studies. This is one of my areas of interest about longevity in general. And these studies, the final proof, and obviously it's not the final proof, estimate what percentage of our longevity is related to what. And we know for a fact, again, there might be certain percentages difference that the healthcare system only affects about 20% of your health. It's about your genetics, it's about your diet, it's about your exercise, it's about the environment you live in, your social situation, social interactions, and that what makes health.
And
Okay.
by the way,
Now,
Alan, just to throw it in, that 20%, I think 18% is if you show up to an emergency room with a car accident or
well, absolutely,
appendix.
that's in there. No, that's
Yes,
overall health.
yes, yes,
Gunshot wound, car accident,
right, right.
whatever, and look, we're not idiots. We do know that if you're having a massive heart attack and you could revascularize someone, you could
Oh,
save their life.
absolutely. That's a
And
life-saving thing. That's
and
why
and
heart attack
someone
deaths have gone
someone
down.
having a stroke that they could revascularize it. It happened to a patient of mine about a month ago. The guy came in, could not move the whole right side of his body, could not speak. And literally half hour after the intervention, he was speaking, he was fine. The life was saved. I agree totally, totally with that. We haven't talked about, go back a minute to the side effects of the statins. And I know you see this in your patients because we know it's worse in the elderly about the fatigue, the brain fog, the body aches, especially the muscle aches and stuff.
And
And,
muscle weakness,
right.
falls. Yeah,
And the pharmaceutical industry has totally said we have the final proof that that's not true. Okay.
right.
Well, I could tell you almost every day I see someone in my office that comes to me that was started on a statin by the cardiologist, and they're here today because everything hurts them. And I said, okay, I could check your blood, but let's not. Just stop the medicine for a week and let's see if it goes away. And it goes away. And the pharmaceutical companies will say, "Oh, that's the placebo effect," because everybody
Exactly.
everybody reads online, what's the number one cause of stopping statins, and it's muscle aches and pain and fatigue and weakness. But they don't believe it because they have the final proof from their own studies. And again, this is what is wrong with our entire healthcare system. We could talk about it from, antihypertensives. I laugh. I teach the residents this. I say this to every resident at some time. I said, well, normal blood pressure when I was a resident, the systolic was 100 plus your age. So if
Right.
you were 80, 180 was okay. Now, if you don't get it under 110, make them fall and break their hip. You're a bad doctor. And those fallen, broken hips don't get accredited as bad medicine. They don't look at it that way. Oh, they were old, they fall, they broke their hip. It wasn't that they were walking around on 6 cardiac drugs and their blood pressure was 90 over 40.
No, you'll get in trouble if you don't lower their blood pressure to 90 over 40. If they fall and die from being 90 over 40, you're considered a thorough doctor. That's exactly right. I always say if we followed the cholesterol and blood pressure guidelines,
We could
everyone
kill
would be
everybody.
lying face front on the ground and the cardiologist would say, "Good, that's a good doctor there.
And
Look at
the
these
orthopedists
patients.
would love
They
it.
are perfect."
Just think of how many were hips and femurs they'll fix and, wrists.
No,
They'll do
yeah,
a lot more
everything we do
surgery.
to hurt people through medicine actually helps the medical system because it just makes people sicker and creates more work for other doctors, especially all these. We do have a rash of hip fractures and falls that have not been there before, and of bleeds because half these people who fall are on blood thinners because they have atrial fibrillation. So that even though they're falling, again, the cardiologists have told me, well, In fact, when I got nailed by the board, one of the things they went after me was because I said Eliquis causes bleeding. Now, any idiot knows that that's true,
Mhm.
but not the
That's
cardiologist.
actually proof.
Right. That's proof. It's just the only question is how much bleeding is the only question. But these cardiologists don't even believe that. They don't believe these are magic pills that everyone took them. They would live forever and not have a stroke. I just had a patient I'm taking care of who had a stroke with a Watchman procedure, which is supposed to prevent
Ugh.
strokes. And they said, What went wrong? I said, what went wrong is you listened to your cardiologist who got a lot of money to put in this procedure and it doesn't work. It's never been proven. And by the way, I got in trouble for that too because a study came out this year that said like it was like 2 or 3% of people who get this Watchman procedure, which is supposed to replace blood thinners if you have fibrillation. 2 or 3% died within 2 weeks of getting this procedure.
Yep.
When I read the verbiage in the study, which was a study done by industry by the makers of the Watchman procedure, and academic doctors who get paid a lot of money to do these studies. But by the way, they don't get paid directly, just so you know, their
Yes.
institution gets paid. So it looks like they didn't receive any money. But anyway, the idea of this study showing that people died, the cardiologists who went after me highlighted that too, even though I had just put in an article that wrote this, and these were facts. These many people died. This looked at total numbers of Medicare people who got the Watchman, and like 2 to 3% died within 2 weeks. That's a fact, but they wrote misinformation. Now, so facts have become misinformation, and
That's right.
unless you believe the LDL thing, you are a misinformer. But I don't, I look, Alan. I know statins can help some people. There was a
Absolutely.
great JAMA study that looked at high risk people over 5 years, and 1% um, avoided death. 1% in 5 years of younger people with heart disease meaning blocked arteries, 1%. Now, you could argue that we could have achieved the same results if we had put that money into a massive diet program. And people have proven that if you go on a very
No, they don't
strict
want to
diet,
prove that. It's not good for business.
but that was a long time ago. There were some doctors who were doing this. I'm forgetting the name of the most famous one, but because I'm old. But he showed he actually literally put people on this pretty strict diet without any bad stuff in it, and over just a couple years, plaque regressed, and there was a lower heart attack risk.
No. So there's multiple studies out there that the by far and away the best diet, most of us can't do it, is a plant-based diet for cardiovascular protection, maybe not for overall health. I would never do something like that. But if you look at the data, it's just everything is so skewed to the fact of drug, 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 drug. And when we talk about, a good healthy diet, whatever people want to agree, whether it's Mediterranean or whatever, or a mixture of certain things, uh, diets and healthy eating are bad for the food industry, so they're not going to support this because what kind of foods are we pushing? Chips and dips and, you know,
Twinkies.
highly processed foods, and they can't even give, RFK Jr., I'm not, I'm definitely skewed on certain things, many of the things he does, but some of the things he says is true. Like we eat shit in this country.
Yeah, and he actually wanted to reduce pesticides and sugar in schools, and they blocked that.
Yeah.
Now, that should be a no-brainer. That should have been 100% of Congress supported that, and
We all
Trump's
know sugar's the
agriculture
enemy.
department blocked it too. No one wants that.
If anyone doesn't believe sugar is your biggest enemy,
Yeah, it's crazy, right? People don't believe that. They believe cholesterol is your
yeah.
biggest enemy because that's what these people, these cardiologists banging their fists want you to
Yeah,
believe. That
even though it's in your body helping you when you're
yes,
healthy,
your
when you're
body makes
healthy.
cholesterol. Your body does not make sugar. Just so you know, your body's making cholesterol, and we've decided, well, the body's wrong. We're just going to shut down the cholesterol completely, and
So,
now we're heroes. But
so
your body makes it, and your body makes more of it as you get older, and stores more of it, more fat when you get older, as I unfortunately know. But it's for a reason. It helps longevity. I go to Iceland once in a while, and the older guys have got these big bellies. Now they're still walking 5 miles a day and eating incredibly well, but they live way longer than we live because when you get older, the body wants some fat. It
Yeah.
needs it.
So, and especially when you're younger. So in my
Yes, and when
days,
you're very young.
in my days when I actually, practiced newborn medicine and peds, I did a lot of it. And I used to fight with parents who'd want to put their kids, their babies, infants on low fat milk. And I'm like, don't do that. Babies need fat to develop neurologic development. Like their brains are relying on that fat to form. Don't deprive them of the most important thing now. It's almost like putting a kid on a statin that's, 18 months old.
Which, by the way, the new guidelines do suggest. I don't know what their cutoff. It's like 10 years old to
Uh,
check LDL and put people on statins. But here's the thing. What gives me a ray of hope, Alan, is you read the comments on these blogs and people are thinking these people are nuts.
they
And
are.
I think
That's why
across the
they're
country,
zealots.
people's eyes are opening a little bit, and that's good. And they do realize that they should be eating better. All my patients realize that that's the key. So I tell my patients who decide to pursue the route of good diet, I said, this may not lower your LDL. And they say to me, well, then how do we know if it works? I say, because everywhere in the world where they eat this diet, they live a long time. So, and it doesn't matter what their ethnicity is, what their sex is, they live a long time. And guess what? Those people in those areas of the world, they also don't measure their LDL. So you want to join that club? It's a good club to join, the non-LDL checking club. Just eat well. We can't measure it, which drives people crazy in the medical field.
Yeah,
Everything needs to be measurable. That's what our
exactly.
book's about, basically, is that we've reduced all disease to discrete measurements and then expanded the definition of illness um, by just saying, oh no, we have to get the LDL lower, 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 or sugar lower, lower, blood pressure lower, lower, lower. No one's going to argue that people with a very high blood pressure should be treated or people with real diabetes should be treated, but they push it lower and lower and lower. And by the way, the best treatment for diabetes is a good diet. We could cure it with a good diet, but you don't ever see these doctors talk about that either. It's drugs, 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 drugs. And a lot of the drugs used for even that are lethal. They actually cause increased death rate even as they're lowering
Absolutely.
the sugar. It's crazy. So yeah, I was just interested to see. I know we've talked about cholesterol before. It's just interesting to see how people are responding to
Yeah.
this. And you got the doctors, the TV doctors who are not blocked on my computer, who are screaming and yelling that this is all
Yeah.
misinformation, the people who scream about it. And then you have everyone else who says, yeah, well,
And
we're not doing
and
it.
this is another example of, what happens when a new guideline comes out, which everyone says is evidence-based. But again, let's tell you folks, the new guidelines are put out by a bunch of people who are on the payrolls of the pharmaceutical industry. Every guideline is, whether it's asthma, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, you're listening to the experts who are making millions of dollars in, I don't want to say kickbacks. It's not kickbacks. It's educational fees and research fees and speaking fees, which don't go on the Sunshine Act, so you won't see it because, like Andy said, the money is funneled through the hospital systems, and the hospital systems are happy because they're bringing in money to pay their doctors. And it just propagates more and more and more drugs, more and more things we do to people rather than for people to help them live longer and better. So that's what it should be about. Or
And that's
turn
what
to
it should be
healing.
about.
Read about it.
Read about it. And I think honestly, and Alan and I will never say that we have the last word. We're always willing to hear other sides of the issue, and we invite that. We love it. We love when people write about our articles and we
Yeah.
can address them. And look, there was a guy who wrote about one of our articles recently, and I wrote back to the editor, yeah, he's absolutely right. I totally agree with what he says. Because, you know, we're always open to look at, like when I saw that Zetia study, I'm like, oh, well, I'm curious what that shows because we found that there's no benefit in older people. And I said, yep, there's still no. In fact, recently niacin, which was pushed by the same
Oh my God.
brilliant doctors because it lowers cholesterol really well, lowers LDL well. Recently, a study came and showed it definitely kills people, a lot of people. So now everyone's saying, well, we shouldn't be on that. Well, in 10 years, when Zetia is like cheap, so cheap, no one, the doctors don't want you to use it anymore. They got more expensive drugs they want you to use. They're going to say, wow, look, we should have known before. There was a 1% death rate even in that early study. How come we didn't look at that? But now we can't use it anymore. Let's use these biologic agents that cost
Yeah.
$50,000 a year because we haven't gotten far enough to show that they kill people yet. It takes time. But yeah,
Yep.
we are always happy to hear things that dispute what we say. And any scientist, anyone who believes in science would say the same thing instead of pounding their fist. That, you know who pounds their fist like that? A fascist dictator or a fanatic. That's who pounds their fist. And that's who these people are. They want you to listen to them, like these cardiologists who reported me to the board. They say, well, this was our message, and you're giving studies that refute our message, so we're going to silence you because we can't handle it. They don't have an ability to say, yeah, he gave you these studies, but we have these other studies. And they can't do that. They just get angry and pound their fists. And it's really sad, Alan. But anyway,
I
with all
think
this,
we should let folks go.
okay, Alan, I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week, Andy. Have a good week, everybody.